Hello. We come to the final week of speaking effectively, to the topic that all of you are waiting for. Yes, we're going to discuss interviewing skills, and we'll focus largely on how to appear in an interview and how to make an impact in an interview, particularly in a job interview. In this particular unit, I'm going to look at 3 outcomes you want from an interview and explain what an interview is, what are the different outcomes you seek from an interview. So, I'll begin by looking at what is an interview. Why do we need an interview in the first place? What is the purpose of an interview? I recall a senior HR manager deviate from textbook definitions of interviews to explain what he understood an interview to be, and I agree with him. Let me first list the textbook definition and then move on to what this leading Indian HR person defined the interview as. So, first of all, why do recruiters, why do employers need to hold an interview at all? Because you already have sent them all the information they need in your CV. Everything that you have done, all the qualifications, the skills that you have, they are all listed in a CV. So, why on earth do interviewers, why on earth do employers call you for an interview, which is an expensive process, time consuming and expensive process? So, why is it that they call candidates for a face-to-face interview, and when that is not possible these days, it's possible to do a video interview or even a phone interview? Why do they do it? What is the purpose of the interview? Now, the purpose is that just on the basis of a CV, employers gather an idea about your skills and your qualifications, but they don't really know what kind of person you are, what kind of abilities you have, why do you want the job, can you do the job, and meeting you face to face or talking to you on the phone or even conducting a teleconference or video interview can give them an idea about whether the skills that you put down in writing on your CV, they actually match. And mind you, interviewers are trained to find out whether you have simply listed the skills you have listed or you actually possess them. So, what are the 3 things that interviewers or employers are looking for? And what is the purpose of an interview? The first thing is, can you do the job? Do you have the appropriate background, including education, skills and experience? Do you have the expertise needed to make you stand out? And are you able to learn and adapt? The second purpose of an interview is, will you do the job? Now, a lot of times you have the ability to do the job, but you might just appear in an interview for a lark. You might not come clean about why you are taking up the job. You might be using the job only as a stopgap arrangement, or maybe you have applied for the job, but your heart is not really in the job. So, do you want to work for this company, or do you simply see it as a stepping stone? Are you aware of and honest about your future goals and plans? Are you motivated and eager to learn? The third purpose of an interview is not after finding out whether you can do the job, we need to know, will you fit in? So, this is very important for certain organizations, and employers want to know, yes, you might be an excellent person, you might be the best person as far as your skills are concerned, your qualifications are concerned, but would you be able to fit in the environment? So, this has as much to do with do you work well with others? How well do you respond to supervision and criticism? Do you have the skills to balance where the team is currently weak? Do they like you? And in some organizations, employers involve the team members to in different ways to find out whether they like the person, and they do take the opinion of the team members when they decide on hiring a person. For instance, they might call all the members for when you make a presentation. So that would be one way of involving the entire team. Or they might ask you to have lunch, informally interact with the team by eating with them or going out with them. So these days, interviewers and employers use very informal techniques to find out how you are as a person, what are your real capabilities, do you fit in with people, how do you behave, what are your social skills, including all the informal aspects of your life. They try to find out, and through both formal interviews and also informal interviews. Now let's move on to the first outcome. What are the things you need to get out of an interview? What is the first outcome? First is to prepare for the most common interview styles. What is the first thing you want from an interview, and how these lectures are going to prepare you? The first outcome would be, how do you prepare for the most common interview styles? You need to know, first of all, what are the different kinds of interviews. So interviews range between the structured interview, the screening interview, the behavioral interview, campus interview, panel interview, team interview, telephone interview, computer-based interview, video-based interview, and the unstructured interview. So you need to, before you prepare yourself for an interview, you need to know what kind of interview this is. It's not always possible for you to know, but you must prepare for different common interview styles. For instance, if you have prepared for a one-to-one interview, you're used to dealing with an interviewer who interviews you alone. When you're faced with a panel of interviewers, you have 3 people asking questions or even 5 members asking you questions, you feel extremely nervous and intimidated when you have question after question being fired at you. And so you need to know, and believe me, it's not always, it depends on what you're used to or what you're prepared for, whether it's a structured interview or whether it's an unstructured interview. Mind you, sometimes you're totally at a loss when you're used to a particular kind of interview, and you're taken aback when you are put through an altogether different kind of interview because you're not prepared for it. Believe me, it's happened to all of us, and I can share an experience where one is in the academic world, one is used to interviews which are very structured, which are usually conducted by a panel of interviewers, and including the head of an institution, the subject experts from other disciplines. So an academic is usually prepared to handling that kind of interview. You know what kind of questions would be asked, in what order. But corporates these days, certain kind of organizations, companies, they have done away, they eschew these formal interviews, and they feel that informal interviews are more productive, are more efficient in finding the right kind of person. So I myself faced this, and I was totally flustered because I was expecting to be interviewed by a panel, and I was told that this was for a corporate, and I was told that you just I was told to go in where I was expecting to face a board or a panel, and I find that it was the head of the organization who asked me to sit. He came out of his desk, walked behind, and came and seated himself on a sofa and asked me to sit on a chair on the right side, and asked me to just have a chat with him. Now, by the end of the chat, when I assumed that this was just a chat and there would be a interview that would follow later, I found that this was the interview. The chat itself, that informal chat where I thought we were just having an informal conversation, turned out to be the real interview. And in that informal chat, this head of the organization had found out whether I need to be hired or not, and yes, I was hired, but it was very different. It was very different from the kind of interviews I was used to having. Similarly, you have these days people are trying out team interviews, peer group interviews, where you have the entire peer group comes and meets you informally first, takes you out for a coffee, asks you out, joins you for lunch, and then you're asked to make a presentation before the entire group. And it's not just the top person in the organization, but the entire group decides, okay, are they happy with your presentation? Are you the kind of person they need? So be prepared for whether you're going in for a one-to-one interview, you're going for a panel interview or a team interview, and whether it's a face-to-face interview, a telephone interview, or a video interview, whether it's a structured interview or an unstructured interview. So now interviewing styles also differ. Different employers have different ways of interviewing. The most traditional and the most conventional way of interviewing candidates is the directive interview, where the interviewer will direct the interview by asking you the questions he or she asks you, and you're expected to do most of the talking. So traditional organizations still persist with directive interviews, where the interviewers are in a more advantageous position. They just shoot a question at you and you're expected to do all the talking, and you feel as if the questions are being fired at you constantly. And believe me, all the academic interviews of this kind, where you have a panel of 5 to 8 interviewers, each one of you firing a question, and you're expected to do all the talking while they're munching on their snacks or drinking coffee and chatting with, checking their phones while you're doing all the talking. So this is one kind of interview style. The second kind of interviewing style is non-directive interview. Now, in this interview, it's more of an informal interview, where the interviewer doesn't provide direction for the interview, doesn't tell you doesn't ask you any question. Instead, the interviewer asks you what you'd like to discuss and leave it to you to provide the direction of the interview. The third interviewing style is a stress interview. Now, this is often done by organizations where, particularly for positions which are very stressful, which involve stressful situations. So in these kind of interviews, interviewers are not looking for your skills and abilities, your qualifications, but they're more interested in knowing how you act or how you behave when you are under a situation of stress. It's more of a confrontational style, and it's not always for stressful situations, but it's also more to see your thought process. This kind of style may be adopted even for normal positions, ordinary positions, in order to see that you may not give the right answer, but the thought process that you use and your ability to respond with a challenging creative answer is what the interviewer is looking for. And then we come to behavioral interview. In this kind of interview, the interviewer is seeking specific examples and responses that will give them an insight into both your personality traits and critical skills. They're looking for what kind of person you are, what kind of traits you have, what are the skills you're going to bring to the organization. And these questions may focus on intellectual competence, leadership ability, team personal skills, adjustment, flexibility, motivation, communication skills, administrative skills, and technical skills. So it's not just intellectual competence, but they're also looking for your leadership ability, team building skills, adjustment, flexibility, and a whole lot of other things. So now, as I said, that these are the traditional interview styles and structures, but what is really an interview according to my HR friend? According to my HR friend, how many times has this happened to you that you appear in an interview and you come out looking very disappointed if you don't get the job because you feel that you are not a capable person. So it does a lot of damage to your self perception, your self image, and you say, I didn't get the job, so I may not be a very good person, I may not be a very capable person, or you may think that maybe I did not perform well in an interview. You might be right, but very often if we understand what interviewers are, we'll realize that interviewers are not as much, of course they assume that you have certain capabilities and you have certain qualifications because it's all there on your CV, and the reason that you have been called for an interview is that the interviewers are aware of these skills and capabilities that you already possess. One way of looking at the interview, as my HR friend did, was to say that the interviewers have a profile of a person that they have in mind, a profile of a person they have certain organizational goals, certain goals that they have set for themselves, and they need a person, they have a profile of a person who would help them achieve these organizational goals. Now, the idea of an interview is, of a good interview, is that your profile has to fit the profile that the organization is looking for. Now, you might be a very capable person, you might have the best qualifications, you might excel at a lot of things, but probably the profile that you have does not quite fit into the profile that the organization is looking for. So, what is it that you need to do to make sure that your profile is aligned with that of the profile that the organization has in mind? And one way you can prevent yourself from being disappointed is to tailor your profile to the profile that the organization is probably seeking. And in this, you can direct the interview, even if it's a directive interview or a non-directive interview. The non-directive interview gives you that opening that you can steer the interview in any direction you want. The non-directive interview, the directive interview doesn't give you that option, but your answers, the answers that you give will help you to steer the interview in the direction you want it to go. You can lead the interviewers to get a picture of yourself that you want to present to them by selecting among your several capabilities and qualifications the ones you want to highlight, the ones you think will fit into the company's or organization's profile. So, now I'm going to focus in the next part on a particular kind of interview, which is the behavioral interview, because this is the most common style of interview which is preferred by interviewers these days, particularly in companies. So, what is a behavioral interview? Let's first of all find out. I've already explained to you. So, uh, it's a structured interviewing style based on questions designed to probe past behavior in specific situations. So, let us first of all understand what is a behavior based interview. It is a structured interviewing style based on questions designed to probe past behavior in specific situations. Now, through the, rather than listing your qualifications, rather than saying I am like this, or I am using adjectives to describe yourself, this is a style through which the interviewer elicits the qualities or the traits that you possess through certain situations, through your behavior in specific situations in the past, and through that it focuses on experience, behavior, knowledge, skills and abilities related to the position. And this is used to get an idea of how an individual will manage duties based on their past behavior. So, let me just return to the what is the goal of this interview. The goal of this interview is to assess the candidate's ability to respond to the situations that the job may present them with. The questions asked therefore will be based on the job description, the performance indicators, the skills, personal qualities required and interviewer's knowledge of operating in the role. And questioning will be based on historical examples from your current or previous experience. Either way, what is the interviewer interested in knowing? One is the thought process you use to when you describe a situation, and two, they want to know the values of the candidate and the outcome of the situation. Behavioral interviewing techniques evaluate a candidate's experience and behavior to determine their potential for success and to determine their suitability for a particular kind of job. So, the typical questions will give you questions will be posed to you, which will be based on the job description and what is expected of you, the performance indicators, the kind of skills you require. And this approach, as I said, is based on the premise that your past performance is the best predictor of your future performance. So, how do you behave, how do you deal with a behavior based interview is what we will come to next. One of the ways of doing it is using the STAR technique, and I will show you how this technique can be used. How do you prepare for a behavioral interview? What are the kind of, how is it different from a traditional interview? Behavioral interview is more probing and more specific than traditional interview, and the questions are, tell me about your greatest achievement, what did you do when. Whereas a traditional interview will have is more hypothetical rather than focusing on past events. It will be, tell me about yourself, what would you do if. So, now the second outcome which we want to get out of this lecture or this whole entire module is, particular this unit, is to prepare answers to typical interview questions. How do you prepare answers to typical interview questions? Now, what are the kind of questions you may have? One is the general information questions, behavioral questions, character questions, stress questions and inappropriate questions. Mind you, you can get any of these questions. Interviewers are not there to make you happy. They are there to find out whether you are the right person for the job. So, it varies from interviewer to interviewer what kind of questions they may use. Some interviewers feel that if they use stress questions, people do not give out their best under stress, and they use a very relaxed manner of interviewing you. In fact, that's even more dangerous than stress interviews, because you end up revealing a lot of things about yourself which you don't want to reveal. So, you have to think of different kind of questions. Most of us focus on information questions. We think people want to test our knowledge, and we prepare for our interviews, reading up books and revising our knowledge, our concepts, so that if we asked a specific question, we don't make a fool of ourselves. But remember that interviewers will ask you behavioral questions, stress questions, and several other questions, even inappropriate questions. I'm going on record to say that I will not name the interview, but I have been through an interview where I was asked questions which were very personal in nature, pertaining to questions which should not have been asked. And had I been more trained, I would have found an appropriate response to those questions. But since I was very young and untrained to answer this kind of questions, I just took them in my stride. But today, if I were to be asked a question like that, I would know how to respond to a question of that kind. So let's quickly look at some of the behavioral questions, because we will go into these in great detail later. So suppose a job posting states that company is looking for a team player. Possible interview questions could include: tell me about a time when you had to adjust to a co-worker's working style in order to complete a project successfully, or describe a situation when working with others produce better results than if you had completed the project on your own. Can you share with me a time when you demonstrated your ability to work as an effective team member? And now let me share some tips on how to prepare for behavioral interviews, which are the most common kind of interviews these days. Prepare for responses using the STAR technique or the situation action result model. You begin with the situation. What was the situation? What you encountered? Two is how you responded, the action. And the third was what were the results you achieved. So how do you prepare for a behavioral interview? Identify the skills questions of the position. Think about your experiences which demonstrate a clear link between your behaviors and the competencies required for the job. You can do this by recalling any successes or difficulties encountered in summer, if you're a student, in summer and part-time jobs, steps you took to successfully complete school projects both independently and as a team member. You could be anything, but you must create toolbox of answers for each of the competencies, say teamwork or analytical skills or leadership skills. As you prepare for one job interview to the next, you are actually filling a box of tools. You can easily pull from your toolbox when a behavior-based question is presented in the future. So suppose you are asked teamwork. Both behavioral based and traditional type questions. Develop and write out as many examples from your courses and work experiences. Develop anecdotes or scenarios that demonstrate your strengths. Use the questions to follow as a guide. So you must not just in behavioral interviews or behavioral questions, but you must prepare yourself for different kinds of interviews and different kinds of questions by preparing a toolbox of answers. Now, how do you use the STAR technique as opposed to the situation action results technique? Define the situation or task, define the action that you took, present the results of your actions, and the final thing is be as specific as possible, including names and dates. When describing actions taken, be sure you include the actions that you took, not just others. And the third outcome of this unit is to plan the questions that you will ask. You yourself have a right to ask questions. Plan the questions that you will ask during the interviews. Your questions, you can count good questions to ask and turn off questions to avoid. We will turn to the questions, different kind of questions in another unit. So with this, I conclude the unit on what an interview is, and I showed you 3 outcomes of this particular lecture. One is to show you the different kind of interviews and different kind of interview styles. 2 is how to prepare yourself for different kinds of interviews and interview styles, and the third is to kind of questions you yourself can ask during interviews. With this, we conclude this particular unit.